Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where we talk to just normal members of society about their experiences of mental health. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Paul, who's going to be talking about his life and his experiences around this very important topical subject of mental health. As I do with all of these conversations, I'm going to do my introduction, and then I'll let Paul introduce himself, tell you all about the work that he does, what he's doing, and his plans for the future. So Paul and I met back in July. I was delivering a training session to the company he was working for at the time. And it was a great experience. I always remember Paul very vividly because he stayed back after the sessions to have more conversations, wanted to know more about what we were doing, what mental health work looked like, and so on. And it was just fantastic to have those sort of side conversations. Great guy, parent, looking after obviously children as well as being a husband and a partner. And I just think it's just very interesting to have these conversations. Very topical at the moment, talking about men and mental health, of course. I'm just really enjoying having all these chats with my mates. This is what it feels like, so that's what it's going to be. So Paul, over to you. Give your introduction to this podcast, please.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this series of amazing podcasts. And before I start, just gratitude to you for coming up with such a great idea, which is informal conversations around mental health, as you say, with regular people that you've come across in your work and in your life, to normalise these conversations, which I think really has to be the essence of it. So thank you in the first instance. So me, a little bit about me. So yeah, I've got two children. 11 and 14, so going through some interesting experiences with young people growing up, becoming more aware of their mental health. But I've always been very aware of my own mental health and the challenges I faced actually through my career, through my personal life, and how that's kind of found its way out through mental health and through some struggles, but a lot of learnings actually. I had a 30-year media career. Mainly in the book publishing industry, but with a short period working at BBC Worldwide in digital. Quite high profile, senior leader, managed teams, and I've really enjoyed my career. And a few years ago, about 4 years, I looked up from the desk, had a little bit of bit of coaching, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about a little bit more, which kind of gave me an opportunity to have a think and to have a pause. And the journey I've taken on the last four years has really brought me much closer to issues of mental health, because with my former employer, I beg your pardon, I was the founder and inaugural chair of our Wellbeing Network, which was part of a wider diversity and inclusion program that I'd been a part of. And so from nothing, literally from nothing, from a standing start over about 3 years, really grappled with the issue of mental health at work amongst my colleagues, and what the business could do from the inside as well as from the top, in terms of moving the conversations and the support and the initiatives around mental well-being at work. And I was very proud of the work I did there, but I was really I guess the word is really passionate about opening up, opening up about myself, being authentic, really being present, and trying to create a safe environment for others to feel that they too could come to work and where they were struggling or where they wanted to have conversations, there was a safe place and an opportunity to start maybe easing that conversation open, or conversations around it, even if it's not personal, but issues that they notice going on. So I've lived a life of anxiety. I've lived a life of various different mental health issues, and that's gone up and down as we all have with our lives. So I've really quite a drawn out sort of history of mental well-being, and something I feel very passionate about taking forward now as I look to the future in the work that I'm hoping to do now that I've left full-time employment in publishing, and thinking about the next steps and how I can use a lot of that experience and use that knowledge to help others, help myself, and further this conversation.
Well, great introduction, and you've brought to life so many elements that are really important in the way that we bring these conversations to light for all of the people that might be listening or watching us chatting to each other here. It's such an important subject. You brought something to that organization, the previous organization that you were with, that they hadn't set up. And as you say, you sort of took it from the ground and built it from the ground up. And that's brilliant. And that needs to be recognized. And let's just talk about that briefly, if that's okay. And then we'll talk a bit more around the sort of your mental health and how that's evolved. that one
Sure.
thing around the workplace, bringing in a new opportunity, a new thought. How did you find that, getting that off the ground? Did you find it was very well supported at first? Did you struggle to find the right sort of support through that? Because I'm sure there'll be lots of people listening who want to start doing more. And it is that question of, well, where do I start with this conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question. There were some early struggles, but I think the place where I started with from this was we've got to start somewhere.
Yep.
And the best place to start really is with people around you, and to find out, first of all, what the appetite, what the landscape looks like with those people around you. Now, at the point that we started, or I started this, we were going through a bit of a cultural shift, or beginning the cultural shift in a big organization, to really look at diversity, inclusion, and representation.
Yep.
And whilst I've been involved in some of the more traditionally sort of thought of areas around diversity, inclusion, and representation, one thing that struck me was that actually what affects everybody is their well-being. Their physical, their emotional, their mental, their financial well-being. And it, in many ways, whilst there are certain sort of aspects that will influence it, we all have those health issues. We are all people, and and for me, I really wanted to connect with more people across the business on this. So the first stage actually was just to kind of put something out there to invite people to come to a meeting, to just start chatting about well-being. There was no particular focus on mental well-being. It's just well-being, wellness, our health. And what was really interesting is there was a real appetite for people to just find somewhere to talk to others about it.
Yep.
I think so often with workplaces, we kind of go in, we pass people as we walk through the doors or the corridors or however it is, particularly when we were working in a physical environment. I recognize things have been different for this year, and we say, good morning, how are you doing? And everyone says, I'm fine, good weekend, not good weekend. And that's pretty much where it begins and where it ends. And that's certainly where it was beginning and where it was ending. And there was something very unsatisfying about that for me. So to start the conversations off in a more meaningful way, to ask twice about how people are and to listen more in a workplace was really, really something I wanted to do. So the early challenges were kind of engaging senior leadership, but actually I sort of kind of put that to one side to begin with and thought, well, what we need to do is kind of galvanize energy from in, see what the appetite is from the people within the organization. And so first meeting, grab a people, interested people, put an email out, we're doing this, what do you think, come along, very informal, no formalities, and just chat. And that very first meeting, I think there must have been in an organization of around about sort of 500 to 1,000 people in and about the building, 10 or 15 turned up, which is not bad actually, just something.
Yep.
And never to be put off by the fact that very few people might come to that first one is the key message. Because actually the thing about health, and as we will probably discuss, the thing about mental health is, if you feel like it's helping one person, then that's got to be good enough. Yeah. Because that person has been helped by it, and it may prevent something more serious happening later on. And the most rewarding thing I've had from this work is knowing that just one person has come back to me and said, that really helped me, and now this, or now I'm doing that differently, or now I'm thinking about it. It saved somebody from something.
Yeah.
And so we sat around and we chatted, and it was really interesting what the comments. We just threw it out there. What are people thinking about their health? What are they thinking about at work when they come in about their health? And do they think about it even? Or do they walk through the doors and pretend that there's somebody else once they're in the doors? And actually that's not an issue. And what was very, very clear straight away was everybody who joined that first meeting had something they wanted to talk about health, whether it was they weren't going out and getting enough exercise, whether they were feeling very anxious at work, or there were things they wanted to say to their bosses at work that they felt very underconfident about or felt they couldn't talk about. Again, whether that was physical or mental or financial, actually, there's a financial piece here that can't be ignored.
Of course, yeah.
And from there, we then thought, well, okay, this is the first group. So the question I asked everyone, well, how do we want to take this forward? How do we want to really start this thing? And so there were a few kind of people there that were particularly keen to say, well, let's gauge a bit wider. Let's kind of do something a bit wider. So what we did is we took it from there. We just put together a very simple survey monkey, asked people a few questions, and then just sent it out through HR and said, would you mind putting this out just so we can get a bit of a health check on our company and see what comes back? And it was from those early stages that we then began to get much more information about what people thought about health. What were their key concerns? What were their priorities when they thought about health? And what were the areas they felt they were least supported in when they came to work? And actually at that time we didn't have a budget. So the challenge was, how do we mobilize and move things forward without any money? So we can't suddenly create a gym downstairs, or we can't set up a mental health first aid program or something like this. So without the money, what we did is galvanize the energy and move things forward in those first things that we could actually do, which didn't involve money. So where people would volunteer to do something like talk to people about mindfulness, or where people were comfortable talking and sharing their story, their journey, their feelings, their anxieties when they came to work, and those kinds of things. And then sort of small little things started to happen, little programs of things and little initiatives that didn't cost anything, but actually were starting to make a difference, both to the people that were presenting them as ideas, but also other people. And then I started to say, well, who could we connect with? What things could we be supporting that won't cost us money, that will support other people, that will then generate conversation around these? And the Samaritans was one that just happened to, I think I got something in my inbox about an initiative they were running in the early part of the year called Brew Monday.
Yep.
Which is about sort of having that gloomy day at the beginning of the year, which is now remarked as being the day that most people feel most down.
Yeah.
And Brew Monday was an initiative that they put together about talking and finding 10 minutes to
and
talk.
A cup of tea. Yeah.
And it was something, and that cost us nothing, and we were supporting a really good cause. And we already had an attachment with the Samaritans by way of charitable donations from the company. So we got in touch and we went for it and just said, well, we really want to support this. The idea for me about encouraging people to take 10 minutes out of their day, have a cup of tea and sit with someone and just have a conversation really made a big impact, because that's the simplest thing we can do.
Yeah.
Just talk. And and because the Samaritans are were backing it and supporting it, was something for them, it kind of began to introduce this idea, well, what are we actually talking about when we talk about talking and support? So those were the sort of early days of it, and they were just pushing things forward. There were some times in those first few months when I suppose one of the things I look back on that I learned was that, you don't try and run before you can walk, because I was quite keen. I was really, I was really passionate, really excited. I wanted to do so many things. And some people in the group were saying, can't we do this? And can't we do? And I realized as that process that went on that you just slow down. It will come. But it will come when you galvanize proper support, when you can show there's something going on and you're building an energy, almost a force and a momentum to take things forward. And that's when you begin to be able to galvanize greater attention. And then you might be able to mobilize other people in the organization that might be able to influence things like budgets and give you more money to do things. So those were the early sort of days of it. But it took time. It takes time and it's slow. And the other thing to really remember, or actually to reflect on, and that I've learned really, is that mental health is different for everyone. Not one size fits all. And so there's a really big component in this about listening and recognizing that when you come up with initiatives or thoughts, make sure that there's an alternative for somebody who perhaps doesn't go that way. So for example, a simple thing that we did very early on was about how mental health is impacted by physical health, and people wanting to do little running clubs. People who hadn't run for a while but thought, actually, running is something I want to get back into. Can we sort of form a small club that might run at lunchtimes? And of course, there are often seen to be benefits of doing things like running and your mental well-being, getting out, time to think, time to connect with people. Well, that's all very well for people that are keen on running.
Yeah.
A lot of people that want to do something similar, they don't want to run. So one of the things I learned very early on is don't just restrict yourself to these one ideas. Somebody else will want to do something similar. Maybe it's walking.
Yep.
Not those kind of things. So those are the lessons, the early lessons, and it's kicking some of those bigger initiatives that might require money into the long grass.
Yep.
Thinking you'll come back to those, but build some momentum first and see what you can achieve just by energy, passion, and interest.
Wow, and that's such an incredible sort of role that you've just sort of outlined to people. And I get frustrated when I hear budget. The budget, the B word, the other B word, of course, which it tends to be sort of relating to how much is it going to cost us? It's going to be cost. And you're right. This is a reality that says, well, actually, first and foremost, you could be kind to people, and that's free. Kindness is a free gift that we all have, and that could be giving somebody a bit of your time. That can be saying thank you to somebody. passing a positive affirmation or something nice to somebody. And I think that's such a critical point. I love the way you've outlined all of that. The momentum thing is so critical as well, because we go running into this stuff going, oh yeah, it's going to be amazing, we're going to make it the world changer, and it's going to be game changing, and then it sort of loses its energy, because the energy it's almost like putting your foot on the accelerator full flat out to start. You can't run on that fuel for long if you're going to do that. You have to slow burn into it. And I think what I've learned from what you've said is that do things slowly, but keep doing things. That's so important, because it really is. It's not, there's no finish line with it. I think that's the key.
There is no finish line, but it's the keep listening piece as well. Listen to what's around you, because one of the things that I also appreciated after a few months of doing it, I noticed in the room some people that were particularly keen and particularly helpful around initiatives and wanted to be more involved. And so one of the other things I recognized is that often when you do these networks, you have someone who leads or is a chair, and it's often one person, and you might have a few people around that. But actually, one of the things that I realized very early on with wellbeing is that for people to come forward and begin to talk about some of the more difficult things to talk about around mental health, particularly, they need to know that they're safe doing so. And so I thought, well, here I am, I'm a man. I held a senior position, quite a senior position. I'm quite confident. And maybe not everybody in the place feels that I'm the best person for them to talk to, or they might not be able to, however open and available I make myself. So one of the things I recognized early on is that actually we need a few other people here next to me, is this one size fits all thing. So I spoke to a couple of the people on the network who were showing a particular drive and interest, and said, well, why don't we just be co-chairs? We sort of ponder around this idea of leadership, and of course leadership is important, but sometimes to have really effective leadership, you need to have more than one, so that people feel that if they can't quite connect with that particular leader, they can still go to that person and feel that so actually what ended up happening in quite a short space of time, say 6 months, I think it was, we ended up having 3 of us, different ages, different gender, different. So, and that really, for me, was a really big turning point for me, because that was when I really recognized that what does one size not fitting all really mean? And it means it in all different directions. And actually that really opened up scope, because of course, when we start to talk about health, there are things about health that some people feel more comfortable talking to a particular person about, they might not. And I wanted to remove any of those barriers that people felt that were there. And one of the other things is that, for example, when you start to think about things like talking about menopause, when you start to talk about men and mental health, to allow people access to start thinking, actually, it's safe to talk about it. They may need different people to talk about, just to start that off. Doesn't mean you can't be sympathetic or able to do it or go to somebody else, but just to start things off. So that was very important. But the other thing, you talk about the budget word, and as the momentum built and as my enthusiasm built, and I thought, well, we're going to be given an opportunity to sit with the board and talk about what we're doing as a network, I began to wonder what really and truthfully, how much could they afford not to take notice of this? I mean, just by way of a few facts, really, 45 billion is the annual cost of poor mental well-being to UK employers. 45 billion. And 15%-ish of workers in England have symptoms of mental health. And 57%, I think it is, or nearly 60% of sick days of working days are lost due to anxiety, stress, depression. Nearly 60%. And 50% people, about just under 50% of people, are still uncomfortable talking about it. So when you think about the B word and the budget word, and then moving that conversation beyond just, let's pull some of those things out of the long grass. And when you get the opportunity to be given a board as an audience, now's the time to really start thinking, okay, so what, aside from some of those smaller things that meant a lot to those people, and showcasing where you can get to without any money, what is the cost of this to the business? And I mean, for me, that really became quite a powerful driver, because I felt as we progressed as leaders of a network, and if we really were genuine about looking after the people in the business, we had to be a bit more challenging about this and say to the business, well, look, there is an impact here. And when you think about budgets and your bottom line, this potentially could cost you quite a lot of money if you don't take it seriously. And that's when things really started to shift for me in the network.
Brilliant.
Because once we've been given the invitation to have the board as an audience, this was an opportunity to really start moving that needle a bit further. And it was really interesting when we did that, because we put together a presentation to the board to show what we'd done, what we'd achieved, what we could achieve just by people and passion and importance and things like kindness, gratitude, and focus. But then I realized that what if we're a credible network that really wants to move this conversation forward, what kinds of things do we really want to do as objectives and goals? And they're a bit bigger when you sit in front of the board. And interestingly, you and I met on a mental health first aid training, which you delivered masterfully, and which had a big impact on me, because it was all the way back 4 years ago that I started to think, we look at physical first aid without giving it any thought whatsoever. It's just something every company must have, so that there's somebody around if someone burns their hand on a tap or a kettle or something. So the idea of mental health first aid started for me 6 months after we started that network.
Yeah.
But it took that time and a few cultural shifts for it to actually start happening. So to be present on that course and to be a mental health ambassador or a well-being ambassador doing a mental health first aid course, was a real moment for me, because it just thought, you're beginning to actually put some money here and to realize that this is going to have a benefit to you as a company and your teams. We can't keep ignoring the mental health crisis in this country.
No, we can't, and you're absolutely right. Oh my gosh, we could talk about that program for ages. And these small moments we have to have these conversations. I love everything you've said. It's just been, such an interesting journey, and I love the way you've you put that through very clearly in the stages, the approach, the investment, the opportunity to talk at the board level and to really tell them, the reality. Because I think there is sometimes that disconnection, and not across every company, of course, but in lots of organizations and businesses today, the hard world is we need to get money through the door to pay the bills. And sometimes we forget that the people are the ones that get the money through the door, and we need to sometimes invest in them.
So equally, Matt, if the company invests in people's mental health or well-being, they get back more than they invest. 100%.
I'm 100% on board with that. I get it. I know the ROIs are significant, and it is that moment of convincing or enlightening, isn't it? Of, the reality is this is what you're spending already on mental health without even knowing you're spending it, because of those 50% of people that don't want to tell anybody that they're struggling with their mental illness. It's such an important conversation. But I want to take it to you now, Paul. I want you to talk a bit about your mental health and your experience personally with your journey of mental health through your life, because you're obviously passionate about this subject. Your motivations are genuine because you've been through some stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that? You all right with that?
Yeah, very happy to. And at this point, I would say that this is the point when real change started to happen on the network, which is sharing. And and a big message, I think, for me through this podcast with you, is when we share of ourselves, we give permission to others to know that it's okay not to be okay. And it's a simple message, but it takes a bit of bravery, and sometimes it takes a little bit of risk in ourselves to know that we are going to open up. But the payback, and when I say payback, it's not that you get something and you go away and you're really happy, but the payback for others, for yourself, is huge. And I think if there's one thing that I would like to convey, is the opportunity for senior leaders particularly as well to hear that, because when you say what you've been through and what you have experienced, other people suddenly say, well, it's not just me. And actually they can look at other people and say, and you can still achieve so much, and you can still thrive, and you can still come through it. So that's the first thing I'll say. So my journey through mental health has been quite a long one, and it ebbs and flows. It never just gets better. Yes, there are periods when you feel really well, but if we're honest, there's no magic cure to everything, and there are times when it can be impacted through your career in a much more challenging way. So for me, a couple of things happened in my personal life that had a big impact on my professional life. I guess the main one, and I've talked about it quite a lot, is when I lost my father to a car accident very suddenly, a very sudden bereavement. I was very close to him, and I struggled with the grieving process. Not well, obviously, I went through the grieving process, the immediacy of it, the immediate shock, but it came, but the grieving process was very prolonged for me, and the impact of that grieving came a bit later when I became a father myself, without my father present to give me that support to show him my children. And I hadn't really realized that I'd been holding on to a huge amount of grief and shock for such a long period of time, until I was in a very high pressure situation with work, trying to manage a new role with a bigger team, trying to be the best father I could at the time, to look after my family, and the cost there was beginning to be myself. And whilst all of these things were coming on top of me, I was trying to deal with an underlying grief that I hadn't really dealt with particularly well. And the response to that was that I developed kind of hyper anxieties, really, and in an attempt to try and control my environment, I started to behave in ways that were obsessive and compulsive. And it was only later through therapy that I realized that the shocking nature of my father's death in a car accident was so chaotic and so out of my control that I then started to control other things in my life, to get a sense that this could happen again, so I need to control. So I started to do a lot of things in the house. I became very overprotective of my family in a way that I thought, well, our property's got to be perfect. So I started checking the property constantly for damage, whether that was damp, whether that was leaking pipes, cracks in the walls, those kind of things. And when people talk about obsessive compulsive disorders, it really is terrible. What it means is you check constantly. I was checking in the night, checking in the morning, checking as soon as I came home, anything I could find. And then I was calling tradesmen to come and try and fix things that probably weren't even there.
Right, yeah.
All of that. And at the same time, I developed a phobia. And when I developed that phobia, it turned into another compulsive behavior, because the phobia was a phobia of storms and extreme weather. Again, things that were outside of my control. And I began becoming very fearful of the damage it could do to our property, but also the protection of my family seemed to be at risk. So how that turned into, well, apart from the very fact that, I rehearsed where would I go in the case of a storm. I mean, literally, where would I go? Because I was finding it really, really, it caused a huge amount of panic in me if I thought there was an impending storm. And I was really hiding that, by the way, because phobias, we all talk about arachnophobia, no problem. But when we start to talk about other things, we become quite embarrassed because there's a big stigma there.
Yeah.
But the compulsive disorder there was I started checking weather forecasts every 5 minutes. And even looking out the window thinking, is there going to be a storm? And so on and so on. And it just became totally consuming for me. My anxieties were completely out of control. My compulsive behaviors were really becoming distracting, but I was masking the whole time. So I would go into work, I would go through the doors, and you would never have known anything was wrong. And then when I came home, but my wife began noticing a lot of this, obviously, and she sometimes said to me, what is everything, you really seem on edge, Paul, and you've got to stop getting these tradesmen in and all that.
Yeah.
It reached a stage where I was carrying so much of this that I was driving my car one day, and I was just overcome with this kind of, just everything was it was all too much, really. And I sat at a junction, ready to turn right, and I just had this thought in my mind. It wasn't a suicidal thought, but it was a thought that if I turn my car into the oncoming traffic, the car would be hit, I'd end up in hospital, and someone would have to look after me, and this would all just stop.
Right. Wow.
And I just realized I was looking for someone to rescue me from this constant exhaustion.
Of course.
I don't know why, but I had the forethought to then just turn the car around, and I went straight home, and I literally walked in the door, burst into tears, and said to my wife, this is what I was going to do. I was genuinely, I'm ready to do it. Please help me. And I just crumpled and just said, I just can't stop all this behavior, and I need something to, and that was the moment. And she just sat me down and she said, what do you need now? What do you need right now? What's going to help you now? And that was a really big question, and it stayed with me a lot. When someone is going through something, it's important to understand what they need that moment, not to try and fix, not to try and sort of come up with solutions and say, oh, well, it's this or it's that. She just said to me, what do you need now? And I just said, I just need someone to help me to unravel this mess and to stop me doing this. And so she said to me, well, when you say someone, what? And she coached me a little bit. And in the end, I said, I'm going to have to see the doctor, but I'm scared to see the doctor. I don't know how to talk about all this stuff. It seems to me when I talk about it, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's mad. And then I start using terms like that again. And we start getting into these kind of poor use of vocabulary around mental illness, crazy, mad. People just think I'm just off, fruitcake or whatever. Yeah. I really don't like those terms because they stop us talking about it. So I went to the GP. GP said, you are unwell, Paul, and we're going to get you some help. And we're just going to spend some time unpicking that and finding what the best help is. And cognitive behavioral therapy was the help. And I was referred to a 6-week course. My employer understood, but I still didn't tell my employer what it was. I just said I'm going on therapy. They didn't offer anything more than that. This was some years ago.
Yep.
And it just unraveled those knots in my mind. It unraveled those processes of thought that led from one thing to the other, and it really helped me to unpick what was behind this need for control. And it's always stayed with me. I've recovered. I got through it, and after that period of cognitive behavioral therapy, I then went into psychotherapy to deal with the loss of my father, to deal with that grieving. I've always been anxious, Matt. Always had an anxious disposition. Mm-hmm. And I am happy to talk about that now because you know what? We all carry anxieties, we all worry, and we all have mental health. And as a man, I think it's really important for me to talk about that to everybody, but particularly to other men. Yeah. Because for some reason, we just want to hide it a lot. And being authentic is one thing. And if you're a senior in a business, sometimes it's easy to be authentic, but think about everybody else and how difficult it still might be for them when they've got managers and deadlines to constantly hit. How easy is it for them to be authentic? So we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it to give permission, but we also need to talk about it so other people feel like it's going to be okay because somebody else has been through that and they've come through it in their way for them and they've continued to be successful for them, whatever that success looks like.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's the thing. We write people off too quickly and we forget that actually we're all normal people that sometimes have struggles, worries, concerns, anxieties, and we need to stop writing people off. We need to start encouraging, talking, communicating, being open. We're going into extra time at the moment, Paul. It's all good. I just want you to briefly, we're going to close in a few minutes. We'll take this into extra time because I think your story is just so interesting and insightful and powerful in lots of ways. So you've moved on from that organization that you were with till recently. You've got great grand plans now, though, in terms of taking some time out. Tell us what you're going to do next. I'm a big fan, so what can we be supporting you through next?
Well, one of the things that I did go through in the last 4 years was to train to be a qualified coach, executive and leadership coach. But I want to try to do that coaching for leadership and executive and business coaching. But I want to also bring into that the element of well-being and the element of looking and facing challenge around mental health as well. Coaching offers a really good opportunity for space and time for people to think about what's going on for their life, where they might be. It's not a psychotherapy, but it's a listening therapy. It's a future focusing on goals. And I want to really sort of focus a lot of the experience I've had in business, understanding my own mental health and raising my own awarenesses and thinking about the mental health piece in that. I really feel very strongly that when I practice as a coach, it's both as a business coach, but also to allow people to be themselves and really come to coaching and be very person-centered in my focus, to challenge and allow people to go deeper, because it's only when you really go deep into some thought, the right questions, and the space is held non-judgmentally, that you can bring to the surface some of the things that might be preventing you doing other things, whether that's in your business or your personal life, and to move and shift. I'm working as a partner coach at the moment with an organisation called 50/50, which is a coaching organisation with an incredible fellow coaches, which is supporting this conversation in the workplace and really talking to workplaces about the importance of mental health, but using coaching to be focused on goals and how to unlock those things for people. It's about empathy and authenticity, empowerment. Coaching offers that. So that's what I'm hoping to do. But of course, I'm not leaving behind a very successful publishing career. So, you know, if there's an opportunity to bring that into the media world as well and to focus on that, that'd be great. But really coaching is something I want to focus on going forward. And using coaching as a method to both help people with their professional and personal lives, but also to be comfortable and confident about addressing some of those other more difficult challenges that coaching can help.
Brilliant stuff, and I can only wish you all the very best of luck with whatever that's going to look like next. But there's great opportunities. You've obviously got an amazing skill set, and you've got some your lived experience is just its own power and energy to support those conversations, especially around well-being, mental health, and things like that. Paul, we're at the end. I'm so sorry, we have to sort of close this off. And I just want to say, so I'll close. I'll just ask you to say a few words just to close as well. But just want to say a huge thank you for you. I genuinely, I'm so lucky to have these conversations, you know, to spend an hour or so with just lovely, great people, amazing humans. And I just want to say a huge thank you for you for taking time out to talk to me as well. And yeah, I'm wishing you all the best, really. And I'm sure everybody listening wishes you all the best too. And we'll spread that kindness and happiness, and your future will be one with lots of great opportunities, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Matt. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about it with you in such a relaxed way. And to those people listening, I would really just encourage people to sometimes just be brave, and to know that when you do open up to people, you know, more often than not, people genuinely want to listen. And I've found an incredible amount of support from men. And actually, men do want to talk about it, but someone has to go first. And if I leave any message to anybody, is go first. If you feel something or you need something to say, be brave, stand up. Someone's got to go first. And why can't it be you?
Well, great words. Thank you, Paul. And as I remind everybody on this podcast at the end, to touch on what Paul's actually said, if you're brave enough to reach out to speak to somebody, you can talk to Samaritans. Samaritans is a resource that's always there for people. It's free to call on 116 123. Always know there is somebody who will listen. I'm here. Paul's here. If you need to speak to one of us, if you know us already, then please feel free to reach out. And just make sure that you don't go through this on your own if you're struggling. I think it's such an important part of all of this discussion. We need to talk about mental health. We will continue to talk about mental health, and yeah, that's what it's all about. So Paul, thanks a lot. We do the little wave for those people that can see us. For those that can't, that we are waving, and I'll speak to you soon, buddy.
Cheers, man.
Thank you.